Hi, everybody. Good to see everyone. Hello, hello. Nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces. I'm Ryan Kayla. I'm one of the three co-directors of the Tech Policy Lab, which, if you don't know it, is a unique interdisciplinary research unit that bridges computer science, information science, and law. And we've put together interdisciplinary teams to tackle complex problems around tech policy. And one of the other things that we have our pleasure to do is to bring in terrific speakers like Joe Turow in order to talk to our community. Often we try to bring in folks from other disciplines, and indeed, Professor Turow is at the Penn Annenberg School for Communication, where he is the Robert S. Lewis Shayon Professor of Media Studies and Industries. I know him primarily because he is an absolute giant in the field of privacy and in general questions about our digital society. And he's a prolific and I think given the heavily sourced and sophisticated material, just really accessible author. And so definitely a person I point to as capable of writing something that is deeply academic and well sourced and full of great ideas, but also legible to anyone. And so a couple of his books, we actually have them at the lab, are The Aisles Have Eyes, which is about surveillance within grocery stores and other kinds of stores. And his most recent book is going to be talking about is called The Voice Catchers. But he has many other great books like The Daily You and a number of others. I couldn't recommend them enough. And so he also has the honor, I guess, a peculiar honor of being our first in-person speaker in a couple of years, which is really cool. So he came all this way. And we know, and as a consequence, in addition to those in the room, we also have folks on Zoom. And so if you hear him repeating a question or something like that, that's for their benefit. Okay, Professor Turow, thank you so much for being here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, I was the first to say no when COVID started, when they invited me, and now I'm coming back, and it's great to be here. My son lives in Seattle, so it's an extra thing that I can visit him as well. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I want to get into discussions, and we only have 50 minutes. I wrote this PowerPoint slideshow to give you an arc of where I'm going and how it's, what my arguments would be. Some of it is reflected in the voice catchers, some of it is not. But it really has to do with, as I say, Voiceprints, bioprofiling, and the future. What I call the voice intelligence industry, which is a name I made up for the kinds of things that are going on. And you all, probably everyone here is called an 800 number. And you hear that expression, this call may be recorded for training and quality purposes. I don't know how many people, and it's turned out a lot of people don't know this, but there's more and more a chance that if you do this, the contact centers will be listening to your voice, that is software will, and supposedly listening to what your emotional state is and triaging you to a particular agent based on what they think, whether you're happy, sad, angry, logical, and they will then respond to you based upon that software inference about who you are, and then deal with you from that standpoint, also linking that to, say, a history of your purchases with the company. This has been going on for about 10 years, and more I've been noticing some companies add the words analytical purposes also. It's part of what's been going on, and yet it's under the table. Very few people know about this. But it's not just call centers. Devices such as smart speakers and smartphones are now capturing both our words and the timbre of our voices. How many people, just out of curiosity, have a smart speaker? Okay, less than half the class. I find that college and graduate students have it less than other people, but in the US, it's about 23% of Americans supposedly have one now. Amazon's chief Alexa scientist told the online technology publication 10 that, quote, when she it's interesting, when she recognizes you're frustrated with her, Alexa can now try to adjust, just like you and I would, right? So there are ways to think, again, about this idea of emotions, and we'll get into more. Soon, companies may also draw conclusions about your weight, your height, your age, your ethnicity, and more, all characteristics that some scientists believe are revealed by the human voice. For example, I spoke to Rita Singh at Carnegie Mellon University who does work on voice inferences. And she and a bunch of other people, she was kind enough to give me a book that she had just written before it came out, which I sort of worked around the formulas. I read around the formulas. But essentially, the idea here is that the voice is a portal to your body. And Rita would say the emotions, which is what marketers are using most, is probably the least effective because emotions are supposedly a more culturally biased designation. But for example, apart from all of this, supposedly you can tell whether a woman is on birth control pills within a month of the time she started using, based on the person's voice. That's because a new industry is emerging around the contact center and beyond that has the potential to change marketing, I would argue, in society in the US and elsewhere. And very few people are talking about this. This is why I'm here. Part of the reason I wrote the book. The other books that Ryan mentioned, I wrote about them. Oftentimes people didn't know much, but they were gelled industry. This is an industry in the process of being created. And the question is, what do we do? Maybe we can do things now that we couldn't do with the supermarkets and other things that I was writing about. And I call it the voice intelligence industry. Intelligence as in, this is what's going on, knowledge industry, spying industry, if you want to say. It means interrogating your voice to learn things that you may not want to say or not even know, about you based upon what they're inferring. True or not, many marketers see voice profiling as part of their future. And we can talk about this. Again, I'm going through this fairly quickly to finish up so we can talk. So the question is, what's driving marketers' use of voice profiles? That's a guy named John Wanamaker. I don't know if anyone here has heard of John Wanamaker. He was a major merchant at the turn of the 20th century. He was a postmaster general. He owned the major department store in Philadelphia, which had impact on department stores in the rest of the country. He was very interested in marketing. He invented the price tag. I don't know if you ever thought that somebody had to invent the price tag, but we could go into a whole discussion of prices and the way prices got morphed over time and that kind of thing. But at any rate, John Wanamaker had a dilemma, which is often attributed to him anyway. He said, I know that 50% of my advertising works, but I don't know which 50%. And that has been the sort of dilemma that has dogged marketers for 150 years. How do we figure out what 50% of our advertising works? And that an obsession with John Wanamaker's dilemma and a feeling that traditional internet metrics can't solve the problem. In 1994, when the internet went commercial, with the Mosaic browser coming out and companies beginning to put stuff online that they could sell and stuff like that, everyone thought this was going to be utopia, everyone in marketing, because, gee, we can interact now. We can tell if a person clicks. We can solve John Wanamaker's dilemma, right? Hasn't worked out that way at all, but that's what people believed. Marketers' ideal goal for the internet was personalized messages and tracking responses, right? Which of course is still a kind of ideal. It turns out it didn't work out as they hoped because of ad blocking, computer sharing. If I share it with my son or my wife, you don't know if it's I, even with the cookies. Click fraud, you guys all know about click fraud. You know what click fraud is? Click fraud is pervasive. Some people say it's up to 23% of advertising money is wasted. There are companies that try to push against this. It's when, let's say you make a website that doesn't really exist, or that exists but nothing is on it, and then you either pay people in some poor country, or more likely you use robots to make it look like you click on the ads that are sent to the site, and the site makes money that way through programmatic marketing and stuff like that. We could talk about it if you want more, but that's a big deal. Also, other problems. So, if somebody's clicking somebody in quotes, you're getting demographics of that supposed person, but you're not really you're finding out about the wrong thing. And there are other problems we could discuss. Also, you might have heard of what's called the deprecation of the third-party cookie by Google. Google's getting rid of the third-party cookie in Chrome, which is freaking everybody out in the marketing business. Apple is now requiring opt-in. You might have noticed for the mobile ID. Have you seen that, where you have to go on and it'll say, do you want to be tracked? It turns out a lot of people say no. And Facebook freaks out about this, and there's been a real back and forth between Apple and Facebook. So we see marketers following what might be called the unending spiral of personalization. And my notion is that, the sort of early days of the internet is we can personalize, we can track people by their segments, but at the moment they go into a website and do all these things, but then they find out because of those activities and others, it ain't working the way it should. So the marketers say, how can we personalize? We got to keep personalizing. That's what the internet is about. Well, we find a new way to do it. And when I spoke to people in the industry, they would talk about voice profiling as a kind of value added to what's going on in marketing today. Marketers see the use of voice biometrics as a way to learn more about a person, to verify what you know about a person, to extend what you know about a person. Amazon and Google, the highest profile forces in voice surveillance today, are not yet using the maximum potential of all these tools, seemingly because they're worried about inflaming social fears. Okay, and, they're playing it down, but I'll talk about how they're still getting involved in this stuff. Though it's not clear what Amazon is doing, to be honest. They claim, and so does Google, the right to use your voice if you read their privacy policy. Out of curiosity, how many people here have read an Amazon privacy policy? And you're law students. How many people have read an entire privacy policy, honestly? Not all of you. That's a fascinating thing, by the way. I was actually thinking of writing a book about the industrial dynamics of privacy policies, but I think they're kind of passé in some ways, or not. We could discuss that too. But of course, they're contracts, right? And Google will say, and it has said, that if you buy a Nest product, it won't use your voice print for, meaning the actual tone of your voice and all that. It won't use that for marketing purposes, but it does reserve the right to use what you say. It reserves the right to use your voice print outside the house, like when you talk to Google Assistant or something like that. But that's all they talk about. They won't go into details, and nobody really knows what Amazon is doing. But they have many patents that show a strong interest in the future of voice profiling. Amazon does, Google does, Spotify does. This is one great Amazon patent. A woman walks into her apartment or house, take your pick, and she says, it's a cartoon in the patent. It says, Alexa, I'm hungry. So Alexa says, hearing the sniffle and the cough, would you like a recipe for chicken soup? Thinking that she's sick, And then she says, no, thanks. And then Alexa says, okay, I can find you something else. By the way, would you like to order cough drops with an hour delivery? And of course, Amazon owns a pharmacy online. And they don't say she's in Seattle, because in Seattle, you get everything from Amazon in an hour, not necessarily in Philadelphia. And she says, that would be awesome. Thanks for asking. And so Amazon said, no problem. I'll email you an order confirmation, feel better. Okay. Now, that is obviously a patent. Anybody here have an Alexa Halo? How does this relate to the Alexa Halo?
I was actually thinking about it as you brought it up.
Okay.
I should have picked up my privacy policy, but they track your tone constantly when you have the band on.
Yes.
How you sound to others.
Right. The whole idea is if they call it, it's like a Fitbit. It's on your wrist. They're coming out with one that has a display. This one doesn't have a display, but it will supposedly tell you how you sound to your boss, how you sound to your wife or his husband or significant other, how you sound to your kids, whatever. And they don't tell you, and correct me if I'm wrong, I could never find out where they get the information to make that inference. Okay? I mean, how do they know what your emotional characteristics are?
So what they did was you had to go through a series of exercises. I had to take that out.
Oh, I understand that, but what's the training set? Do you follow?
A bunch of short stories that might be different.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess like while you're
So that, and they make that connection. That's actually interesting. And I didn't know that because I gave it to my wife. She was the one who used it, and she didn't tell me that. but that's very interesting. So at any rate, Google has a monitored home app. A patent. And what its patent does, and it's fascinating, it foresees putting microphones around the house, and the microphones with the Google software can figure out who is in what room at what time and how old they are, and you can label the people. And then the controller of the house, as it were, can decide where those people really ought to be and how long, for example, they ought to be watching television versus playing in the pool room versus doing X and Y and Z. And a parent, for example, can use that technology to monitor what any particular child in the house is doing and regulate the technology of the house vis-a-vis the child. And the weird thing about that technology, and it's based on voice recognition of the kid, the weird thing about that technology, in the patent, it says if the parents get divorced, each of them can take the technology to their own home. So the kid, if the kid visits you, you have the same technology, which is a weird thing to put in a patent, but it's there. Spotify has a listening patent where Spotify got it last January, where it says that people who ask for songs in Spotify, Spotify can tell the gender, the age, the ethnicity of the person, and they want to know that information. I mentioned the Halo is a kind of proof of concept. My guess, by the way, before your answer, was that they also use the training set is somehow the Alexa responses. All the data they have from Alexa are being aggregated to figure out what it means to sound sad or happy or angry, things like that. It's all based on the idea that people want to interact by voice, even if they know companies are listening. Okay? And my argument about all this is we're moving into a world now where voice interaction, even with respect to companies knowing what you're doing, is going to become increasingly the norm. And people are going to be less afraid of voice interaction than they are, for example, facial recognition. Because Alexa seems so kind, you know, and Siri seems so nice. And it's an idea that I talk about in terms of seductive surveillance. It's a term that I read in a dissertation that came out in England about people's reaction to telephones, and mobile phones. The notion is the idea that these are seductive because they sound great, because they can help you in certain way. Alexa, what's the weather today? And also because they are cheap. You can buy an Alexa Echo, for example, for about $15 to $20 during Prime days. That's nothing for most people. And you know, and then it goes up from there, but that's essentially what's going on. And they seem to be succeeding. Hundreds of millions of people interact with assistants on their phones. Almost 1 in 4 Americans owns a smart speaker in the home. And they're being wooed to do that. As I mentioned, the term seductive surveillance, meaning increase the seduction, downplay the surveillance, and it turns into habituation. You know, you begin to say, I mean, everybody can look up the weather on their phone, but one of the things that we say every morning, Alexa, what's the weather? Okay. And I did a survey with Pew. They asked me to help them do a survey on smart speakers. And one of the things I asked, I think they thought I was a little bit crazy. One of the things I asked them to put in the speaker was ask people whether they say please to the smart device. It turns out that half of Americans say they say please to their smart device, which is a really interesting phenomenon and reflects this seductive surveillance thing and the kind of habituation or humanization, anthropomorphic idea of these devices. You know, my daughter-in-law says it's nice that they say please because she wants to say please to Alexa to show her kids that you're supposed to say please. There are other people who say, well, you know, this is a computer, and do we really want to say to make like computers are people that we have to think about like that? You know, computers are co-equal. It's an interesting debate, but it is fascinating to hear people refer to these things typically as she, which has a whole women's interest and history behind that. Yes.
The only thing on that subject that comes to mind is I feel like some of the early research on that subject was that like if you were not to say please, or like people who treated their devices poorly actually had like negative psychological outcomes. If they were kind of like became more cruel essentially.
That's interesting because they could, or they maybe reflected their inherent cruelty. But I understand what it's like kicking a dog or something like that. You know, and at least that's how people see it. I think you're right. So companies throughout the economy are encouraging it. Home construction firms are building these things into the walls. You know, and I spoke to builders, home builders, who are, basically it comes down that they feel people want either Google or Amazon, not Apple. And they're literally building them into the walls. And you come into the house and there's a panel that can help you do. One of my kids has all her blinds are now activated by Alexa, you know, and you can get all your Lutron devices and everything that way. Hotels are using them. You go into hotels now and they use them in the rooms as concierges. So you can check out with them, you can ask questions about the town and all that kind of, you can even speak your password and it knows what music you like and all that. And supposedly when you leave, all that gets erased. Schools are using them. Teachers are using them as ways to teach kids rote kinds of things like spelling and other things of that sort. Now, it's interesting, of course, they don't keep data on the kids, but Amazon and Google do keep data on the teachers. So they get a lot of information about the teachers based upon what they're doing. Shopper marketing firms are using them. I don't know if you know what shopper marketing is. It's a fairly large business. There are these companies that, for example, do things in department stores and supermarkets to help hype projects. And there's one guy I spoke to from a shopper marketing company that what they did is they put, this is in Manhattan, a store called Bottle Rocket. They put whiskey bottles in a semicircle, and they encouraged people to walk in and talk to Alexa about the whiskey bottles, and Alexa would decide based upon the questions it asked and the answers you gave, what whiskey bottles you should buy. And supposedly it worked well. The point being, at this time, Alexa cannot tell who you are because of the software. Amazon still doesn't have the ability to sort through billions of voices and figure out who you are. Down the line, I have no question that that may be the case. So if you maybe opt in, every time you go into a store and talk to Alexa, Amazon might know who you are. Advertisers are planning for it. This is a long topic, but it's a really interesting one. If you're an advertiser and you sell batteries, you're really worried. Because if somebody says, Amazon, I'd like to buy batteries, Amazon's going to do one of two things. It will give you the batteries on Alexa I'm talking about. It'll talk to you about the batteries or let you particularly mention the batteries that you bought last time or maybe bought online. Or it will try to sell you Amazon Home Basics, Amazon Basics. And they're worried that with they call it an audio shelf space, is limited. And the question is, how do you get Amazon to mention your brand? We could talk about all the apps that you could get on Amazon, but there's no guarantee that people will know about those apps. And if people say, Amazon, I'd like to buy a kite, what kite company does Amazon suggest? See? So the ad industry is going through, particularly the bigger holding companies are doing studies on how to win over, how do you make sure that when a person asks for a product, they are in the mix. And they're also getting, some of them have decided that they're never going to be, that Google and Amazon are so treacherous that they really shouldn't even deal with them. And they would start beginning to think about using their own assistants in terms of voice actualization and voice profiling down the line. So for example, when I started my research, or in the middle of it, I looked up Erica. Do you know who Erica is? Erica is Bank of America's assistant. I don't know why, there's a whole interesting talk about Eric. It could have been Eric, but it's Erica. And the thing is that Bank of America, when I looked in the beginning and looked at the privacy policy, they didn't mention voice. I said, how's this possible? They have this Erica thing. By the time I finished the book, they had put voice into the privacy policy. They have the right to use your voice. So marketers are roiling with this. And many of them say that voice is going to be the next big thing that they have to prepare for. Within 5 to 10 years, they say people are going to be profiling people's voices. So what concerns marketers, as I mentioned, a voice-first world with limited shelf space in Amazon and Google controlled environments, and ad agency research on how to become part of the answers. As I sort of mentioned, the apps get the transcripts, but not the voice print. The voice print goes to Amazon and Google. And then the question is, what do they do with it? Companies are going off on their own, as I just mentioned, with assistants, and down the line with voice profiling. Now, and my argument is that Google and Amazon may use that to justify jumpstarting their own voice profiling activities. So if they wait for the smaller guys to do it, they can say, well, now, look, people are doing it. We should be able to do this too if they don't do it ahead of time. So the burning question, why should we care, right? Businesses using this voice technology to offer aesthetic pricing sounds great, unless you're in the camp that loses the discount. But they're essentially here, what we're talking about is social discrimination, okay, on a variety of levels. What if you end up being refused insurance or having to pay much more for it because of the inferences they get from your voice? What if you find yourself turned away during early job screenings or have your cultural taste prejudged as you surf the internet? A lot of this, of course, falls under the category of algorithmic bias and being able to short circuit, and sometimes not purposefully, the sort of sensitive areas of society like race and people with disabilities and stuff based upon listening to voice and the voice algorithms. There's also potential for voice scraping. I don't know if you know, for example, Clubhouse and other apps where you go into the place. It's really quite interesting. You can go to a lecture in Clubhouse of people are talking. It's sort of like Facebook for talking. And the people's names are listed. It's like going to a conference where you're all in a room. There's a head of the place and people ask questions. Somebody can scrape those voices. And then they can profile you and sell the data. Yes? Presumably, if somebody wanted to, yeah. Right. It's a little like Clearview AI that did that with faces. And more burning questions, or at least part of the answer. Voice profiling is at the forefront of a gamut of biometric technologies that marketers and other institutions in society will use for surveillance and control. What starts in marketing or what's highlighted in marketing doesn't end in marketing, right? Maybe political campaigns. Imagine calling someone and using the way the person talks as a way to change the ad on the fly based upon what that person is, or even worse, buying voice profiles of people and putting them in the voter file. In some states, that's not illegal to put all these data. And so it could be accessed in some way or other. And of course, then there are governments using it for a variety of purposes. Immigration. Let's say a person says that they're from Ghana or Kenya, or another person says, I'm from Sudan and I'm running away from South Sudan. I'm running away from persecution. And they listen, and the voice profile says, you're not from South Sudan, you're from Ghana. Or you're not from South Sudan, you're from X. It's possible that could be a mistake. Or maybe people speak differently in certain circumstances. It's possible that may be used for political reasons. The police could use voice profiles. The military could use voice. And in some societies, you can see in a courtroom, for example, it's not just what the person says, the witness, for example, but maybe the emotional characteristics or other aspects of what that person says may be used, or the person who's accused. Think about it. And analyzing the voice of a person on the witness chair or the person who's the defendant. And a larger issue is what I call, for this purpose, the hidden curriculum, okay? that as people get used to voice and being profiled, it becomes part of how you get along in the 21st century. So what happens in advertising doesn't necessarily, people say, well, who cares about I hear that a lot. Who cares about if I get targeted with ads? And I'm trying to explain it's not just about ad targeting. You know, it's about, it really is about discrimination. There are lots of people who worry about their status in the marketplace. America is a place where people buy stuff. That's what we do. And a lot of people judge how they are in society, their status, based upon what ads they get, based upon what discounts they get. And sometimes they want the discounts. And so the hidden curriculum is voice profiling is the future, not just in advertising, but this is where it starts. Many states allow opt-out. Some allow opt-in. Some require opt-in. And not only that, like Illinois has a great biometric privacy law where individuals can actually sue, not just the government, not just the attorney general. And I'm not a lawyer, so I'm opening this up for you guys because, I mean, my mother wanted me to be a lawyer, as I told Ryan, but it just, I ended up not doing that. I don't think they thought I could do anything else. But the thing is that my argument in the book is that even opt-in is no good. You could get people to opt in for almost anything if you give them the right kinds of encouragement. I predict, and this is a weird prediction, that you could get people to opt into your analysis. Let's say I'm a marketer and I decide that getting a vial of a person's urine once every 2 months is a great thing to be able to get. Because you can see what they're eating. You can see if they have illnesses. And I bet you can get a significant section of the population, if you give them the right kind of benefits, rewards, to say, yeah, I'll send you a vial of my urine. So this is not just crazy. If we begin to say opt-in is fine for this kind of stuff, for biometrics, where does it stop? Okay? At what point is there a red line in any of our attitudes toward marketing and society? So my argument, and this has been, some people have written about this in terms of facial recognition, maybe for somewhat different reasons, given in law review articles. Maybe we ought to say no. You know, when I started writing about this stuff 20 odd years ago, 25 so years ago, I really believed that transparency in education was the answer. And I've come to believe that there are just too many things to know. People don't have the ability to know this stuff. Do you know that most Americans, we've done this study 5 or 6 times. If you say in one fashion, we ask, if a site has a privacy policy, it means the site won't share your information with other sites without your permission. A huge percentage of Americans get that wrong. They either say it's true or they don't know. And we've done this since about 2003, I think. And just a couple of years ago, we did it again. Pew has also replicated it. So my argument here is there comes a point where you have to draw a red line and say, for marketing purposes, voice profiling shouldn't be allowed. Now, how do you do that? Under what auspices? You could say that because it's so murky as to what companies are going to be doing with your data, they're not even sure. You're not even sure when you say that you're giving permission, that it's essentially deceptive, that there is a deceptive, inherently deceptive activity here. And the FTC has a right to say deceptions could be outlawed. Federal Trade Commission. Yeah. Oh, we have seen it varies, but it starts at about the number of people who get that statement wrong starts at about 60%, and sometimes we've had 70-some% of people get it wrong. It's a huge percentage of Americans who simply don't know the answer. And we've done studies, lots of studies that show that people don't understand the basics of, they know they're being tracked, but they don't understand exactly how that works. They don't understand data mining. Why should they? People have a life, you know? And it takes me, I have to read all the time to figure out how this all works. It took me, my class, I'm teaching a class in advertising and society. I had to go through programmatic advertising with them 3 times before they understood the various facets of it. This is not easy stuff. And when companies say, we're going to take care of you, don't you wear personalized stuff, they want relevant stuff. Everybody wants relevant stuff. But I'm, you know, when it comes to demographics and all the other things, psychographics, behavioral stuff, that horse has left the barn. But with voice personalization and with biometrics coming afterwards, whether it's your analysis or gait stuff, I don't mean Bill Gates, that's this place. I mean, walking, companies feel they can learn about you by your gait, G-A-I-T. So this is a real interesting problem that we're going to be facing for years to come. Right now, they're scared to deal with it, but it's going to get past that time, right? Particularly with the Democratic administration. But we will see what happens down the line. And so how should we think about consent? You know, what does it mean to talk about consent? And Woody Hartzog and Evan Selnger wrote about that with facial recognition. And you've done some stuff yourself about this. Because I argue because people can't genuinely give consent, the FTC, as I suggested, shouldn't allow it. Voice marketing should be a marketing red line. Thank you for listening. So, we'll have some time.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So we're going to pass the microphone around, and Alex, by the way,
Thank you, Alex, for organizing all this. As usual, you did a great job. We're going to pass this mic around. I'm going to ask the first question, and we're going to go to about 1:20 because then the next room's got to get reset here. So my question is about it's about this book, but it's also about your work generally. I associate you as like often you're the person who does a deep dive and shows us the extent of the problem. You know, I mean, it's like we see the tip of the iceberg somewhere, and you're the person who shows us the rest of the iceberg.
That's kind, yeah.
Yeah, and so that that I think is itself a service. But here you're actually getting kind of prescriptive, and you're saying, look, you know, actually maybe we ought to prevent this, right?
Right.
And it makes me think about this question about when does society exercise a precautionary principle? And I wonder in your work, have you ever formulated formal criteria for when society should put the brakes on something and perhaps even move the presumption to the voice catchers?
Well, that's
right?
really an interesting question, Brian. I think I do it in this, basically saying that there is no reason for this to happen. I mean, I don't think marketing is as important for society as the statement that we will not allow our bodies to be plumbed in ways that we cannot control. And I haven't gone farther than that. I mean, you're suggesting a much more systematic approach, and I think that's really important. I haven't, you know, I sort of come toward that, but I haven't gone more closely to that. I think the real issue is most people will say, it's technology, don't be a Luddite. I mean, I don't want to be a Luddite. I think that marketing, voice profiling can actually be useful in, for example, medicine. There have been companies, there's an Israeli company that is using it to try to figure out if someone has a prodrome for Alzheimer's disease, for example. And they tried it with COVID. I don't have a problem with the use of voice for natural language processing. I think the voice is the future. The real problem is, what do we do with marketers? Is advertising that important in society that we should say anything goes? That's basically what I've gotten to.
That's fascinating. I mean, so I think it's always important to sort of establish your normative baseline. It almost feels like a cost benefit analysis. What are we getting out of marketing? What are we giving up, right? So I'm going to turn this over.
Thank you. Nice talk. I had a follow-up question on that. So it seems that the marketing is, you know, like not that essential, but a lot of like developments that these big companies have done, particularly Amazon and Google, like Google Search, Google Maps, you know, getting products delivered in an hour or so. So how do you see, you know, like if marketing goes away, the processing of personal information goes away, how do you see, like we will be able to sustain that ecosystem?
Well, I'm not suggesting Google's going to get rid of marketing by any means. I'm just saying that voice marketing, okay? Google, it's a really interesting problem. That 90+% of Google's money obviously comes from advertising. There are lots of issues with this, but the history of the 20th century was teaching people that ads are what runs the media. And I don't think we're going to get away from that easily. People don't want to start paying. They pay a lot for the infrastructure anyway. I'm not suggesting that this stuff, that honest, I have a lot of problems with tracking and all of this. I think we can ameliorate some of this. I'm just saying, let's not go beyond it. That's all I'm saying. Let's not use the body as the next site for interrogation by marketers.
Just to add like one more thing. So we're talking about the forms, right? So not using voice, which has a very direct threat to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But in that information collection, that's currently happening, how you click on certain pages on a website, which website you visit.
Right.
I think we have the same effect, right? So probably like thinking about effective.
So you're saying that, and I've heard this before also, you're saying that it's not, what they're getting is not all that different, okay?
Yeah.
But I would argue that we're only at the start. Use artificial intelligence on voice, and I can pretty well guarantee you that in 5 years, somebody will discover things about what people, you can know about people that are not directly mappable onto the demographics, sort of location and that kind of thing. That just because they don't know specifics that are so different, and maybe emotion is one, but you can listen, you can look at what people type in their emails, for example. But I think that down the line, it's going to be quite possible to figure out different things that voice can tell us. Did you want to add to that?
I think if you combine location data with voice, you can look at language patterns and then see who associates with who.
That's interesting. Yeah, right. And social mapping, language patterns. There are a lot of things that you could think through where voice trumps some of those other ways of understanding people. And if not now, see, we always tend to think that it's happening now. This is the beginning. This is like 1890 in terms of the American Industrial Revolution when it comes to stores and technologies. We're at the very start of a whole new world. And I really believe that. 15 years from now, what I'm talking about will be piddly. So, yes.
All right, I've got a question kind of regarding how, is this working? Okay. Regarding how you kind of see the market for this stuff developing. It seems to me that there's a tension between companies like Amazon and Google having the best technology to do this voice tracking and the biggest vested interest in doing it. And also companies you mentioned like Bank of America have their own assistants and they might not want to have to piggyback on the Amazon and Google technology and pay them fees. Like it's kind of similar to what we saw with Epic Games in the App Store recently. It also seems to me like people would rather have one voice assistant than have 10 different smart speakers sitting on their counter at home. Do you have any idea or any, prediction how that'll play out?
Google and Amazon agree with you. And so in terms of smart speaker stuff, more and more they're becoming interchangeable. Okay, not necessarily Alexa yet, but Sonos, for example. If you buy a Sonos speaker, you can use Google, you can use Amazon. The idea of there are already companies that do generic voice profiling, generic voices, and all of that whole business is beginning to have offshoots. Okay, so again, in a few years, it's not going to be that heavy a lift to do basic stuff. And whether it's true or not, if it satisfies what marketers need, they may accept that. Okay, that's the issue.
So,
yes, sir.
Just a quick question. So upon initial hearing of all this and the depth that things can go, it kind of, I think, for a lot of people makes their skin crawl. What I'm curious about is that we don't really know what exactly the benefits will be or the harms that will be until we get there. What do you predict will be kind of the most direct, I mean, other than a violation of like making inferences on somebody's body without their consent,
Okay.
do you predict any additional tangible harms?
Well, let me tell you what's going on in China. Okay, if you're a Uyghur, forget it. If you're a Uyghur in Zhejiang, you're not only profiled by your face, you're profiled by your voice. Okay, that's the worst case scenario. But it also might work for the use by military or police. I'm concerned about migration patterns and how they may be used that way. But marketing softens everybody up to this. See, so that's what I said about the hidden curriculum. And I really do believe that there is an important aspect of discrimination even in marketing. I know people say, well, it's just marketing, but we live in a market-based society, and people do measure themselves that way. Yeah.
Certainly accept the contention that especially as more of this data gets collected in voice intelligence, that more and more can be gleaned. I'm just curious if your research pinpointed where are we at right now? How good can we or somebody profile based on voice on certain
If you're
characteristics?
the real action is in the contact center business, okay? And they deal with emotions. They believe that they have data to show that it actually encourages, they can make money off of it, encourage revenues. And there are companies like NICE, like Cogito, that are very involved in this. Amazon and Google have gotten into the contact center business for exactly this reason, natural language processing and probably voice profiling. They're also nervous, I think, based on my book. It's interesting, and you tell me whether maybe I'm just paranoid. I was talking to the editor of who's dealing with my op-ed. I had an op-ed piece in the Times a couple of weeks ago. And in the Times, they actually make you prove every fact, which is great. You need to support the fact. And I was showing him this video on the NICE, N-I-C-E website. And he had to go into it twice. I tried to do it through Zoom. It didn't work for him. So we actually went there twice. Within a couple of weeks, or maybe even a few days, because I don't know for a fact, that we were talking, the video disappeared. And it seemed to me that somebody on the site must have said, gee, the New York Times is looking at this stuff. You know, you might get, they may get a referral from the header as to where the stuff is coming from. I don't know, but I've read about things like that. So it is possible that this company got really nervous. It was a fascinating video. And so for a while, people may be lying low. I'm just trying to point out the possibilities here. And I think that just because it's not full blown yet doesn't mean the larger issue of biometrics and even the particular issues of voice are coming. Everyone in the industry sees that. And the question is, how long are we going to not do anything about it?
But I think we have to stop there because we need to give the room. But thank you so much, Professor Turow.
Thank you.
Fascinating.
Thank you for your questions. I appreciate that a lot.
And you can buy his book if you're interested. It's at a great price point, and you can see him on NPR, hear him on NPR, see his op-ed and everything else. But we're a real honor for you to be here. So
Thank you very
again.
much.
And thanks everybody online.